This is KVR, Kaijuvision Radio, Episode 47, Part 2 of 3, Godzilla Anime Trilogy, Main Discussion. Hello Kaiju and Tokusatsu fans, and welcome to Kaijuvision Radio, a podcast about the appreciation of Kaiju and Tokusatsu movies and discovering their historical and cultural value. I'm Brian Scherschel. This episode is split up into 3 parts. In the previous part, I read the film description and we had a discussion about expectations and other thoughts about the anime trilogy as a whole. In this part, Daniel and I will have our main discussion on the anime trilogy: Godzilla, Planet of the Monsters, Godzilla, City on the Edge of Battle, and Godzilla, the Planet Eater. They put us in this very bleak world at the beginning of this film. All these films are bleak in a way, but we start out incredibly bleak with everyone starving, weak. And then what do we have first? We have a whole ship full of elderly people that explodes.
That's a good way to start it sets the tone nicely.
Yeah, way to set the tone.
It's got a ship full of old people exploding. It was dark as heck.
Yeah,
man.
And we don't find out until the very end about the solving of this mystery. We don't know until the third movie.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's one reason why I thought, and that's actually, I think, one of the main reasons was that mystery. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do an episode about this movie not knowing about most of the stuff that's happening in it. I want to know the rest of the story before I go back to this, and I'm glad I did. That's very tough, starting out already, and it's, I dare say that's quite Japanese to have this. I mean, there are a lot of Japanese everything going on in this story. Like, there's a whole lot.
There's a lot.
It's all
definitely.
kinds of just cultural allusions to life and outlook and state of being and how they view humanity and civilizations and so many other things. Very interesting. But of course we have, the crisis of the elderly in Japan, and that, heck, right there, that's all I need to mention. And
that should say no more.
So we start out and we got that. Then we go to our candy part, which is really nice. The flashback scene of all the monsters appearing, the aliens appearing. So neat. And we're just thrown right into it. And of course, what's really going on? We don't know this in the first movie, though, after just seeing that. But what we do know after we've seen all of this is what? The aliens show up right when Earth is at its absolute most vulnerable. And then what? To take advantage of the situation. That's exactly what both of them want to do in different ways.
Yeah, very different ways. And that's where the interesting contrast comes into play. And of course, that's developed later in the sequels. But really from that opening montage, which is one of my favorite parts of the entire film, where you see first you see Kamakiras and Dogora in the background, and you see Orga show up and all these different monsters. And then you see the 2 different sets of ships come down, and each of them says a different thing. Ship number 1, Exif ship, says, "We're going to convert you to our ways, lest a dark future unfold for you. And we're going to show you that the path to salvation is through our kind of enlightenment, our dogma, I guess you could say." And then you've got the technologically obsessed Bila Salido who come down and say, "We'll solve your problem. We'll build you stuff." And it's also in that moment where you kind of get the feeling that these two are these 2 alien races might be as much at odds with each other as they might be with humanity, but you just don't know. And you know what? When they took advantage, just like you said, the Bila Salido come down, because what happens during a crisis, especially like a massive war, a plague or something? Some people turn to religion, some people turn to technology. And you have aliens that literally represent those 2 extremes come down and say, "We'll save you, but you have to commit to our religious way of thinking." And then you've got the technological aliens that come down and say, "We'll give you weapons to blow the crud out of the monsters. You got to let us live there, because our planet got sucked into a black hole, but we'll help you out. We'll help you out. We'll give you our technology. We'll help you build mechs. And most of that stuff isn't even, like, again, we were talking about the prequels earlier. Apparently the Bila Solido helped mankind start the G-Force and build mechs like the Gatengo from Atragon and a Jaguar J mech suit and Gunhead, of all things. So a lot of this stuff we don't even see. But again, for the purposes of the film, it's not important. You know, all you really need to know is that Alien A and Alien B each have a different method that they're supposedly going to use to save our butts. And you know what? We're just desperate enough to listen to not one but both.
Not very smart humanity.
Not very smart. I mean, in that situation, somebody says, we'll save you, believe what we believe, and it'll lead you to salvation. There's going to be people that'll be like, absolutely, let's do that.
Oh, yeah, there are so many people in the world right now who would just glom onto an alien religion no matter how much BS was in it.
It reminded me a lot of like UFO cults that popped up in the 80s and 90s, like Marshall Applewhite, who was an insane man who started a cult called Heaven's Gate.
Yes.
I don't know if you've ever heard of this. Yeah. And and it's about as dark as it gets. This insane man convinced a colony of people that aliens were going to come and take their souls out of their bodies. And so he gave them all poison on the supposed night this was going to happen. And of course he chickened out. A couple days later, like, families were wondering what happened to their loved ones. And the cops raided this compound and found men, women, and children's bodies all dressed in the same clothing in their beds, having poison. Yeah, the same shoes, having poisoned themselves. And there are people on this planet that are, and I hate to use the word gullible enough, but I'm going to say it, gullible enough to look at a crazy, susceptible. We'll go with susceptible. To look at a guy who says, I am receiving telepathic communication from this alien that wants you to off yourself, and they'll do it. Yeah. That's horrifying. So, like, if any critics of this movie would say, the EXIF, who's gonna believe these aliens? Well, it's happened.
Oh, plenty.
It's happened many times. I mean, Marshall Applewhite's just one insane man that has tricked people into believing that some kind of extraterrestrial and or supernatural force is going to come out of the sky and solve all of our problems. And so that's horrifyingly a thing, because it's actually happened and it has led innocent people to die. So that is very plausible.
Yeah. The thing with Metphies, after you've seen the third movie and see the first one again, you notice how the camera, quote unquote, is looking at him every once in a while? And he's not saying anything?
He gets a lot of screen time when he's just walking or in the background of a room. The first 10, 15 minutes of the movie, he doesn't talk a lot except for his scene with Haruo in the cell. And he's in the background of the conference room listening. He's walking up and down the hallways listening. He's got a look on his face like he knows something everybody doesn't, and he does.
Yeah, we don't find out until about the telepathy at all.
No.
Till the third movie. And then you watch the first movie again and you're like, oh
my gosh.
See what's going on now. And he even smiles a few times, too.
Yeah, he's got this smug look on his face. Yeah. You know, he's got one of those, he's like, I know something you don't because I can hear what you're thinking. And my gosh, it's just, and that's one of the reasons I really hope time will be kinder to these films later on, because now that all three of them are very readily available for anybody with a Netflix account, you can sit and watch all three at once. It might make things clearer to a lot of people and maybe make the story flow a little bit differently. These films are less than an hour and a half long. They're not very long films. You could sit down in a night and plow through all three if you've got nothing going on.
Oh, yeah. There are people who have Lord of the Rings marathons, for heaven's sake. These last all day long.
Yeah. I used to have Star Wars marathons back when there were only X number of movies, of course. And anime trilogy, Godzilla, Netflix, 1, 2, 3. Sit down and have a marathon, get some pizza. You know, and I think it'll flow really, really well, because what I did when the third one dropped was I watched 1 and 2. And then when the second one ended, it was 3 a.m. here in the Eastern time zone. And that's when it's midnight on the other end of the country. And that's when Netflix uploaded the third one. So I just jumped right into the third one, watched all three. I tell you what, it was like watching them like that. That's the way you do it. Mm-hmm. That is absolutely the best way to do it. And looking back at that first one in Metphies, just like it takes on this much more sinister and less ambiguous tone.
And movies have done this too, where there's like a mystery and you find out one of the characters is pure evil.
Yes.
When you watch the movie again, then you're like, oh, and you're watching them and you know what you're looking for. That's exactly what's going on when you go back to these three movies. And then the other part was also the flashback scene. It has the Bilosaldo aliens when they have to evacuate the Mechagodzilla facility.
It may not have gone exactly as they planned initially. And then, of course, later on, when we get to the second movie, it super doesn't go the way they plan. But the groundwork is laid there. And to me, watching that first film, my biggest question leaving it was, what the heck happened with Mechagodzilla? It was there, it was perfect, and then it malfunctioned at the exact wrong time for it to malfunction.
And also, both races want to go back to Earth.
They want to go back. That's why they're helping Haruo, because Haruo is the only human that really is pushing for it. And the leaks of all of the secret Godzilla information about like how his plan to potentially kill him off, that stuff wouldn't have gotten leaked if it wasn't for Metphies leaking it.
Right. Haruo's the ultimate tool.
He is a tool, and I mean, and literally in the third one, you find out that Metphies considers him a actual tool. Like, you are the tool, you are the conduit, and so it's like this Emperor Palpatine level of like crazy planning ahead and setting the scene and getting all the parts in the right place so that you can take your power when it's most advantageous for you. Man, like you don't get any of that on your first run around watching Planet of the Monsters. It's little wonder people watched it and thought that there was very little going on with the characters, and these people are just walking around and looking weirdly, and what the heck's up with Metphies, and why is he looking all smug like that, and what's up with the Mechagodzilla not working and them leaving the Earth and the old people blowing up. Like that's like, talk about a dramatic way to start your movie, like we were saying before. But my gosh. They do mention it briefly that maybe it wasn't an accident. Like, you just don't realize how sinister it is until you've seen all the movies and you go back and watch it. And, like, knowing that ship's going to blow up when it launches makes things so much sadder.
Yeah.
It's heavy stuff.
Yeah, and the other two races, they want to go back to Earth more than the humans do.
Yep, a little wonder why. I mean...
Yeah, and because the humans are afraid of Godzilla, but also because... there's not really anything for them there.
No, there's nothing there. They left all the people behind, and like the remaining people, they left everything. What could possibly be there for them other than death? And the Bilosaldo see it as a new home, and they have a way to kill Godzilla. The Exif see it as a new colony, and they have a way to kill Godzilla. So it's most advantageous for them to go back.
Yeah, that the humans don't have their own way to kill Godzilla. They have to rely on aliens to do it for them.
Yep, Haruo has his way to do it, and that's the one bit of hope that they cling on to. And he's like, no, it'll totally work, and it worked. That's the crazy thing, is it did eventually was a viable plan, but it just wasn't a winning battle. There's just nothing that could have happened.
Yeah, everything goes wrong throughout the entire plan for the humans. Like, everything goes wrong.
If it can go wrong, it went wrong.
Yeah, and of course Godzilla has so much fear surrounding him. I mean, this does it more than some of the other Godzilla movies do. Like the absolute dread, the hugeness of Godzilla, the relation between him and the human race is even more extreme than ever. You can't get much bigger. And a lot of the things in these anime movies, we were mentioning about how, it's anime, you can do anything. And it's like, yeah, do you realize what the sets for this stuff how much money that would have been to build sets for all this stuff? It'd be impossible.
Like, just the Eratrum set alone in the first, third of the movie, maybe 20 minutes of the movie, would have been just insane. The spaceship, the visual effects for all that. And the planet itself, I mean, the planet is Godzilla. It's just Godzilla. Everything on the planet is got the flora is Godzilla. The fauna is Godzilla. You couldn't go to a real jungle to film this.
No.
Building it would have been prohibitively expensive. I mean, a lot of times in films that's just kind of what they have to do. They have to design it all in CG. It would have basically ended up like Avatar.
Yeah.
With this fantasy jungle. But then you lose a lot of freedoms in a lot of other places. And so looking at these films, to tell that story for that amount of money and in the amount of time, because they pumped 3 of these things out in a year. That might not sound like that much, but it's not a lot of time to do 3 really visually impressive movies. I couldn't imagine these things being anything other than anime, quite frankly.
No, and of course all the spaceships and the landing craft, all the vehicles that end up being built. There's no way at all.
No.
So in fact, they did do everything that they couldn't do.
They took advantage of it. They took advantage, but just not in the way people were expecting them to. And that's where the danger of expectation comes in with how these films are being perceived right now, is because, you know, when you say anime Godzilla, everybody thinks 1,000 different things. And I'm sure that the way that these films played out, I'm sure nobody thought that this was what they were going to do. And that, to me, is success. That is an expectation that has been thrown out the window, but not in a bad way. It's not like they said, oh, you want to see Godzilla fight Mechagodzilla for the umpteenth time? Well, guess what? We're not going to do that. Screw you. That's not what they did. No. It's not at all what they did.
Yeah, this was not a screw you from Toho.
Yeah, this was not like, hey, you like Godzilla? How about this thing that has the Godzilla? It's not like that. It's not like they said we're going to intentionally tee people off.
No. So going back to the story here, Leland is killed. That's an interesting thing that occurs because he's one of the humans who wanted to retreat.
Yeah.
So he was gotten out of the way, and I don't know if it was Metphies doing necessarily, but when he's gone, then who's in charge? Metphies. And then Metphies says what? Haruo's going to be in charge.
Exactly.
And then Yuko, what does she say? That's crazy, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what you're supposed to be thinking, too.
Exactly.
Like, we don't know really, but because we don't know what's going on with Metphies pushing Haruo forward like this necessarily. I mean, we don't know what Metphies is really, what his angle is until the end. But when we do, it's like, oh my gosh, this is where things go even worse for everybody, is when Haruo is put in charge by Metphies. Yeah. And that seals everybody's fate in a lot of ways.
Yeah, if Leland was still in charge.
But we should be agreeing with her. We should be thinking, he is absolutely so driven in his hatred that he's going to get everybody killed. And, that's what happens.
That's basically what happens. He expends all of the weapons, all of the ammo, and a lot of the personnel on taking out a Godzilla that's literally a sixth the size of the one they need to kill. And it works, but in the end, like I said before, the battle is it just doesn't pay off. It's not worth it because all these people died and all this tech was wasted only for a mountain-sized Godzilla to get up and curb stomp them with, like, he swishes his tail and kills almost all the survivors.
Yeah.
Like, how do you fight a mountain? It's just insane. And looking back at it, initially your first thought is, Metphies, what are you doing? Why are you giving it to this insane person who's so motivated to kill Godzilla that he's willing to put everybody's lives in so much danger that, like, lots of people are not going to make it out of this? You know, once you get through the films and you look back at it, you think, my God, he was manipulating all of this to get Haruo in charge.
For completely malicious reasons.
And he does it again in the second one, but it's with the Bila Solidel.
Yeah.
With, like, well, we could retreat or we could trek across the Servum-infested wasteland to go see if Mechagodzilla's still around. And what is it, like only 2 people go back to the ship?
Yeah.
Or 3 people go back to the ship?
Yeah, and the people that do come back to the ship, everybody, they're the central committee, you know, is like, what happened? And they're like, Haruo's in charge now. And they're like, what?
What? Whose idea was that? Metphies.
And they're like, oh no, okay. Oops.
Metphies, why? Yeah, oops. There's your problem.
Yeah, because they shouldn't have listened to anybody in this thing.
It's just bad advice all the way around. But then it ultimately comes back in the third one. This is something I thought of after I finished the third movie, thinking back on the first movie, because we've been talking about how seeing all 3 of them benefits the experience when they're so close together, and doing them as a trilogy is really the best way to watch them. If they'd stayed on the Eratrum, would they, and found a planet and rebuilt civilization, would they have still screwed themselves over?
I would say yes.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, honestly, maybe that's because, remember, there were 2 spaceships. There was the Eratrum and there was the Oratio. the Horatio is completely lost. Like, they lost contact with the second ship with all the other people on it, so God knows where they are. A popular fan theory is that maybe Space Godzilla found them, but that's never that's never implied or anything. Maybe there is humanity still out there in the cosmos somewhere, and maybe they're going to find a planet, and maybe they already have, but they just lost contact with the Eratrum. Maybe they're fighting monsters of their own, or they're going to eventually, and the whole cycle will just repeat.
Yeah. Haruo reminds me a lot of Major Akira Yuki, who was played by Akira Imoto in Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla. Like,
absolutely, yeah.
This guy
me too.
has massive vendetta because of what he lost to Godzilla, and then he's able to resolve it at the end.
Yeah, that's his defining character trait, where he is a vengeance character. You know, vengeance characters have been done God knows how many times. I mean, it's one of those tropes, but it's all about how it's handled. Yeah. Revenge plots, and it's all about how it's handled in the plot and with the character itself that makes each one unique. Like, I love the character of Yuki in Space Godzilla. I think he's just cool, man. He's got this Eastwood vibe to him. You know, he's got an interesting way of going about his vengeance.
Yeah, and he's a pretty good actor too. I would definitely say
he's a fantastic. And Akira Imoto is fantastic.
He came across so well with that character, and I don't think everybody would have been able to do that character. There's also Kiriko Tsujimori, who is played by Misato Tanaka in Godzilla vs. Megaguirus, which is one of my absolute favorite Godzilla movies, and she's a revenge character.
Very much so. And she's kind of similar to Yuki in that they both got kind of the military background and they lost someone important to them. That's, that's where a lot of these revenge stories come from. But she's definitely interesting in a lot of ways. And she's so driven and so, she hides her need for vengeance kind of well. But when she's faced with Godzilla, you look in her eyes, you look in the actress's eyes, and you can just see this fire. Like, she wants him dead. She wants him dead. And it's not in an overblown kind, because when you do like revenge stories like that, you were talking about how great an actor Akira Imoto was for Yuki. There's a line that you don't want to cross, because sometimes revenge driven characters can come across as hammy in the hands of the wrong actor, because there's a lot of emotion there. If you're not going to go for a restrained vengeance, then you might be too much. It might be too much yelling. It might be too much drama. It takes a lot of good acting decisions to dictate that kind of thing. Yuki was really great because he was understated, and you looked at him and you knew what he wanted, and you knew what was up with his character. And Kuriko is much the same way. There's a very quiet intensity to Miss Tanaka's performance of her that I just love. And so those two are really good revenge characters within the Godzilla series, and there really aren't that many.
No, there really aren't. Then we get to Haruo, and he is driven. He is
very much so.
He is revenge. He is like the personification of hatred for Godzilla. It goes further than these other characters in the movies did in the live action. Now we've gone to just Haruo wants to kill Godzilla, and that is it.
That is his motivation.
Yeah, and that's why he's so easy to use, is because his hatred dictates his decisions.
He's so focused on it that he allows the wrong one in, as it were. He allows the whispering, conniving mouth of Metphies to tell him what to do and to kind of puppeteer him in a way and take advantage of that need. And the differences between Haruo and the other revenge Godzilla characters we were talking about is pretty, like we were saying before, it's pretty steep. It's a pretty big difference. And I think a lot of that has to do with the medium involved, because I think when it comes to anime, you can let a revenge character get a little more intense and yell and be very, very aggressive without it becoming hammy. And
it's harder to do in live action too.
It's harder to do in live action because you can give your character whatever face you want in an anime. You can get them whatever reaction you want. And it all comes down to the skill of the animator and the design and the voice actor in question. And then, of course, the script. When this plot for this film came out, I saw a lot of Godzilla fans. I saw them roll their eyes through my computer screen because they're like, oh, it's another revenge anime character, blah, 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 blah. I just kind of, was like, okay, that's his motivation. That's all I need to know. I don't know what they're going to do with that. I don't know how they're going to play it out. So why stand in judgment? And when I first saw the film, the first comparison I drew wasn't with Yuki or any other Godzilla character. It was actually with Eren Yeager from the Attack on Titan stories, probably because of the anime connection. And I think the two have a fair amount in common. The storytelling in Attack on Titan is very different from the Godzilla anime series, of course. Both of them, witness specifically a parent die, or parents in Haruo's case. And it drives this overwhelming thirst for revenge. And in a lot of ways, they're very similar because Eren is a personification of not just his own rage and his own revenge-driven motivations, but in the story, it's very clearly implied that he is literally a physical manifestation for mankind's combined rage against the Titans. And it becomes, spoiler alert for anybody who's never seen Attack on Titan, but it manifests itself in Eren's ability to turn into a Titan and fight other Titans off. That really reminded me a lot of Haruo and the amount of drive he has. He's such a driven character. The fact that there's little to him other than revenge is not a weakness of the writing or anything. It's intentional. That is an intentional decision to make his character, like, you see him and you see anger, vengeance, rage in a human body. And he has very few moments, like no moments of levity in the entire series, even in the second film when he and Yuko are kind of having their flirty conversation and she's trying to get any kind of reaction out of him. And he doesn't smile. I don't think he smiles once the entire series. Mm-hmm. How dissimilar is he from a monster? He's an interesting character. And when I see him, I don't just see like vengeance anime character number 9,000. I mean, he is, but I see more there to dissect, at least for my part.
Yeah, and how he's used is particularly one thing that sets him apart from a lot of other revenge characters.
Yes, he's puppeteered big time.
Yeah. So him wanting to kill Godzilla is for pride and for glory and about taking back our dignity as humans. That's his mode of operation.
Exactly. And
it's in the first movie that he specifically maps this out for her when he tells her all of this. A lot of importance that he wants to take back what was taken from him.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty much it to a T. He says, like, we're going to take the planet back from Godzilla for humanity. So not only is he revenge driven, because I think a lot of people saw it and they're like, well, his parents died and he wants to get revenge. It's that for sure, but it's also he represents mankind's need for vengeance, but he's just got it ramped up to 9,000. He wants to destroy the shame that his species has. Mankind, mm-hmm. who he considers to be the rulers of this planet.
He thinks humanity cut and run. Exactly.
They cut and run. Yeah. They chickened out. They weren't brave. They weren't courageous. And that is, I think, a big part of why he is the exact opposite of that, is he sees the people before him, because remember, he was just, 3 or 4 years old when he left the Earth. He sees that last generation as cowards.
Yeah. Okay, so the ending of part 1 is very big. The humans have killed one Godzilla, and then they find out that there's another one that's 6 times bigger, and it's just like it's just like a Heisei movie. Every strategy that they try against Godzilla just makes it worse.
Yeah, that's actually one of my favorite aspects of the Heisei films as a whole.
Yeah.
Is the fact that you've got this thing, and every attempt to destroy it literally makes it come back at you worse than it was, and it just kind of solidifies a philosophy that I like to call the inevitability of Godzilla. Mm-hmm. Because even when he dies in Destroya, there's Junior. His death brings Junior back, and so the inevitability of Godzilla continues, making like the idea of humanity trying to defeat this thing that we created with even more technology, and it just making it worse, is a theme that I adore in the Godzilla films that it's used in. I think it's, when used well, it is like it was in the Heisei films, in my opinion. I think it's just a really, really cool concept. And this film takes things up a notch. And this is where we get into the potentiality of anime and what you can do with that medium, because this Godzilla is a mountain. He clocks in at 300 meters tall. The original Godzilla. We can use him as a good metric too. The original Godzilla and the Showa era Godzilla, 50 meters, which is pretty darn big, but next to this version, which is called Godzilla Earth, and merchandising and such, for good reason. No, it's just minuscule. Barely comes up to the top of his ankle. And the entire film has built up this Godzilla to be this giant, unstoppable force, and then we kill it somehow. This giant thing comes out of the ground. Just like the visual presentation of that moment alone, you know, even if you don't happen to be a fan of the film, I think it's worth getting through the film just for that moment. Just an absolutely like, oh my God. And that's one of the things I really liked about these films, is that each film has kind of a twist ending, or at least like a impactful ending. Maybe not so much a twist, but something you weren't expecting. We were basically nothing but pesky flies to the smaller Godzilla. What are we to this thing? Like, the ending of this film is like, I think it's one of the better Godzilla endings I've seen, just one of the more impactful ones. And the way Metphies greets him was interesting. And Haruo not quite finishing his swearing of vengeance against it. And then it cuts to black. And then, of course, you have the end credits scene, which definitely raised some questions. And at the time, nobody really knew what was going on with this weird girl. I remember seeing a lot of speculation that she was somehow related to Mothra. And of course, it turns out that was true. But like, talk about an interesting way to get you interested in the next film. Like, you've got this huge sucker punch, and then this one last question of, wait a minute, there's people still living on the planet, and then it just, oh, now I got to wait 6 months for the next one.
Yeah.
Darn it. But in that way, I do think that, like, it was one of the few ways that spacing them out like that kind of succeeded, because it did build anticipation, at least for me. I know there were a lot of fans out there that just didn't really care, but for me, I saw, you know, basically two endings to one movie. The big ending and then the ending.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was interested, obviously excited to watch the second one anyway, but now I had a specific reason to. I wanted to know what happened next big time. Yeah, just really, really interesting endings. And I do like that these movies have end credit sequences too, because they leave you with that last couple of lingering questions, and that's always awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So part two, the second film, the pacing is very interesting. It's not exactly what I thought it would be, but besides from the odd pacing, overall the second movie is pretty good. It's about technology and all that philosophical stuff we'll get to later, but it's about putting your faith in technology and losing humanity, essentially.
Exactly.
And how you don't want that to happen. But there are a lot of cool things in this, specifically the vulture vehicles.
Oh, yeah.
And that's one thing that people saw in the previews, and they thought, oh, you know, is that Mechagodzilla? And ended up not being Mechagodzilla. I do like that, and I like all of the stuff with the technology of the Mechagodzilla city. All the interesting properties that this technology has, like how it makes the humans sick. Miana and Mina, they say how it's poison. Then we realize, oh, this is actually another kaiju, but it isn't a good one either.
No, it's just as bad.
Yeah, and Godzilla's been on the patrol looking for this thing, and it's been hiding because it's been using its own technology as a camouflage, etc. All very interesting ideas, and the nanometal and how the nanometal can reproduce and then expand and everything. It's very interesting. And the Bila Saludo aliens they're surprised that it built itself into a city, but at the same time they're not. They're more like at the same time they're really patting themselves on the back. Like, oh yeah, we did a good job here.
There's a lot of smugness in the Bila Saludo. Like, from the moment they find the nanometal and they found out that it's still around, there's a lot of, like, whatever nationalism would be for a planet. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's their race. They're very proud of their race. They basically spend the rest of the movie gloating about how good they are. They've got these big pompous smiles on their faces, and they're saying, you know, lines like, our Mechagodzilla survived, and they're very happy, and they take the humans on a tour of Mechagodzilla City, like, yes, this is what our technology can do. And watching them is like, you can't on a certain level, you can't blame them because it is impressive. But on another level, you're looking at it thinking, man, this is cool, but like, what's the catch here? There's got to be a catch. There's no way there isn't a catch. And of course, the catch is that the Mechagodzilla City is, like you said, it is a kaiju, And the only real difference between it and Godzilla is that it does not have a soul. It is not technically alive. But then the Bilasolido start fusing themselves with it to kind of like how Katsura controlled Mechagodzilla in the original Terror of Mechagodzilla, the second film. You've got that human element to it now. And I remember when I was watching the nanometal grow over Galugu's face and like absorb him, all I could think was Dr. Mifune in Terror of Mechagodzilla saying, it's not quite perfect yet. It needs a living brain to tell it what to do and to make it perfect. And that's what I thought of. Because, the Bilasolido are already supposed to be this universe's version of the black hole simian aliens.
Yeah.
Just like the Exiford, the Exilians. It's very clear that that's what they were going for, but what an intelligent way to use that idea of it's 99.9% perfect, at least to the Bilasolido through their eyes. But how do we make it perfect? We merge it with ourselves, and we make ourselves better, and we make it better at the same time. And in doing so, they have basically created Godzilla 2.0. They don't see it like that, but that's what they've done. The focus on the Bilasolido and their fascination, almost reverence for technology, and that they are almost as reverent to Mechagodzilla as Metphies is to Ghidorah. And of course, it's kind of an interesting way because the humans view the kaiju on their planet completely oppositely. It's really quite fascinating because I see this as a trilogy of perspectives, not just of films, but of perspectives, because to me, the first film is about mankind's relationship to its monster, Godzilla, and then the second film is about the Bilasolido and its relationship to its monster, Mechagodzilla, and then the third one is the same thing, but with the Exif's relationship to their monster, Ghidorah. I also love to think about people's relationship to technology just as a interesting thing to think about and an interesting story. Like there are a lot of stories to tell in there, and like just it's really interesting, and it makes you think, especially as it gets towards the end. But just
I'm a big fan of Blade Runner and Westworld and the TV show, and both of those make you think a lot. And like Westworld especially has gone to such a cerebral point that I'm really beyond impressed. But yeah, it makes you think about humans' relationship with technology. The Bilasolido aliens are so smug, but they're also just, they have a superiority complex.
Oh, yes.
And the humans that don't want to go along with this, what do they say? They say, oh, you're too weak. That's essentially what they say. If you don't want to join with our technology and defeat Godzilla, you're not made of as tough material as we are, literally.
God only knows what they would have continued to do after that point. And
take over
again,
Earth.
Exactly. This is where it calls back to the first film where Metphies tells Galugu, who knows what Mechagodzilla would have turned its fangs on next after killing Godzilla.
Yeah.
Which is already pretty clear, but if it wasn't clear enough, by the end of the second film, the Bilasolido have their eyes on our planet, and of course it's not our planet at this point, but they've got this planet in their sights, and they have the means to take it. It's an entirely different kind of a non-religious way of looking at it, but make no mistake, Mechagodzilla is their god, essentially. They look at it as Metphies looks at his god. It's the same thing, but just through a different lens. There is a lot of talking, and I really feel like the dub would work wonders on this particular film's enjoyment levels.
Yeah. I mean, if it did as good of a job for the part 3, then I'm sure part 2 would be significantly enhanced, because about halfway through part 2 is the mother lode of all cerebral talking moments in the movie. And reading it reminds me of that part in Beetlejuice where they're like, this reads like stereo instructions. But
That's right.
It's fascinating. But I believe the subtitles and the Japanese create a barrier that probably isn't necessary, because in order to fully understand what's going on, and that way your brain can absorb it rather than absorbing it through reading the subtitles. It's less of a fight if the English is telling you what's going on with this, because it does go very deep, and I like what they did with it. But if you're reading the subtitles for it, it's a little tough. I will acknowledge that. As somebody who loves subtitles as much as I do,
Yeah.
hearing this from me is surprising. But
Yes.
yeah, that's my position.
Yeah, I know. I see exactly where you're coming from. I'm a big subs person as well, and a lot of my favorite dubbed things are nostalgic, as most people's are, I think. But as we were talking about earlier, anime opens things up in a really, really interesting way, and it allows for, like, a lot of times when you're talking about a Godzilla film being dubbed, there's that feeling that you're missing something. You know, you're missing something that was, done in maybe the 50s or 60s that nobody thought Americans would care about or understand. But right now, anime is being taken very seriously in America, and there's a concerted effort to make things as accurate as possible. So I feel like if I watch the English dubs for the anime Godzilla films, I'm not missing like anything very significant. And I'm so thankful the subs are there, because that to me is, that's about that. Those subs are pretty accurate from what I understand, except for a couple of moments where Yuko very clearly yells senpai and it subtitles it as Haruo. Mm-hmm. Like that's not what she said. But other than that, the subs are pretty accurate, and I'm glad that they're there for personal reasons, because those subs are going to be a big part of when I eventually do the novelizations for the Godzilla novelization project. Those subs are going to be a big help.
Yeah.
But for trying to sit down and simply understand this very dense story, having it in English with a translation that's accurate is really the way to go, because to me, anime works just as well no matter what language you put it into, as long as the performances and the script are good.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of anime I really love to watch bilingually. And like for something like this, where there aren't even that many Japanese characters in the anime Godzilla films, like a third of them are aliens, and a third of them are Bila Solida, and the other third is Exif, and then the other third is human. And like, you got a guy named Leland, for crying out loud.
Yeah,
He's not
Adam.
Japanese. Adam. These guys aren't Japanese, so like even watching it in English might be a more, like, I don't know. It seems to me it would work perfectly well. And with Haruo and Yuko and a couple of other characters being the only Japanese characters in the entire thing, maybe even in terms of the film's universe, it might make more sense for them to be speaking English with other English-speaking creatures anyway. Like, who knows?
Yeah,
who knows?
And also with Miana and Mina, with their sort of primitive speak, I thought, well, let's see how the subs, or how the dubbing does with that, if it's going to sound hokey or not. And then I was like, oh, not hokey. It's fine.
Yeah. I actually found, I don't remember what her name is, but the actress who played one of the two twins, I found her on social media, and she was really excited to have been in a Godzilla movie and to do this voice. And like the voice that she, I believe she did only one of the twins off the top of my head. The performances were great. I honestly, the dubbed performances for the films are really, really good. I've heard a lot of people complain about Haruo for whatever, like specifically his dubbed voice.
It sounds very American.
It sounds very American, very, we're going to do this, kind of that anime flair to it. Like if you listen to a lot of anime dubs, a lot of them do have that kind of very bombastic, we're going to go do this thing now, that kind of, very thing. And that's not really what Haruo's voice sounds like in the dub, but it does have that very, this was recorded in America kind of a feel to it. And maybe that's turning people off. I've heard people say he's even whinier in the dub. I didn't really get whiny from him. I don't really get whiny from Haruo anyway.
No.
I don't really get whiny from him, but I've heard a lot of people just say, hey, we got this whiny protagonist who's blah, blah, blah. And again, y'all can have your opinion, but to me, it just didn't read as whiny or irritating or anything. There's no point in the story where like anything unintentional about Haruo annoyed me. Like there might have been moments when his character made annoying choices or did annoying things, but like there was like, that was supposed to make you go, huh? When you were watching it. There was nothing unintentional about his character in the way he moved or talked or delivered dialogue that was, or that made me roll my eyes. Like I don't generally get annoyed by movie characters that easily, but he just didn't read annoying to me. But maybe that's just me. I don't know.
Yeah. And to me, the dubbing and the original soundtrack, the voice of Metphies for both is really good. And that's probably the hardest part and most crucial part to get right, I would say. because
he's
if
great.
he sounds hokey, then you're in trouble because you can't have, he's too central to everything that you can't screw that up. You have to get somebody who's going to be convincing as all get out when they're doing this. When Metphies asks the Bilo Saludo to repair that device, and it looks like a little coin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that is the device that we don't know what it's for.
Yeah, you don't know what it's specifically for. It's
you can
implied
guess in part two, but you don't really know.
You don't know. Like, you have to watch the third one to find out.
Yeah, and then we have him use some of the nanometal on this device.
Yeah.
On it. And you're sort of instilling evil from one end into more evil.
That's interesting.
They're doubling down on the evil aspects of this thing.
That's right.
By including the nanometal.
Yeah. It's a fusion. It is a fusion of the two things. The evil of the first alien race in the second film makes the evil events of the third film possible in a strange way, because really Metphies can't really do what he's planning without this little talisman.
Yeah.
And again, it's implied of what's going to happen with this thing at the after credit scene of part 2, but you don't know what's going to happen until you get to the third one, and then oh boy.
Yeah. And then the Bilo Saludo, they don't know what this is for.
No, they have no idea. They're just,
Metphies is using the Bilo Saludo as well.
He's such a cunning character because he basically, the Bilo Saludo have an interesting relationship to the Exif because they kind of want the same thing, but they're working together in a way. They have a weird relationship to them where one, Metphies just kind of floats around looking smug like he's planning something, and the Bilo Saludo essentially write off his, religious devotion as, oh, you and your god that you pray to, blah, blah, blah. They, well, we'll fix your little dinky talisman. It's not like it does anything anyway.
Yeah, they're too confident. And if anybody's predictable, it's them.
Yes.
You can totally,
they're very calculated.
They're easier to read even than the humans, I imagine, to the Exif. So they're like, oh, fine. What harm could that do? And then, of course, it gets them all killed.
All of them. They're kind of like the droid in Star Wars that tells you what percentage you have of failure on your mission.
Yeah.
They've got all the numbers, but they don't have the spontaneity, I suppose, when something might not go their way to deal with it.
Yeah, and then they totally are against religion, too. They view it as weakness.
Yeah.
Which is a very techie thing to do. That is part of that ends up being their downfall as well, because that's again their fault, because they actually give any kind of credit or trust to Metphies, and that's not what you're supposed to be doing.
Nope.
One thing listeners might not know is that my favorite kaiju of all time is King Ghidorah. Yes, I know the name is supposed to be Ghidorah in English. There's this whole YouTube video about it, etc. But I know one thing is that in the first Ghidorah movie, it's Akiko Wakabayashi, and she says the word. She says the name, and it's King of Ghidorah. Ghidorah sounds strange to me. Ghidorah sounds wrong, actually. But, oh well. But and yet in the anime, what do they say? Ghidorah. So that's technically wrong too. Because it should have been Ghidorah, and instead of Ghidorah, but they say Ghidorah, and oh well. But
that's right.
Either way, the name is said in part 2, and it's when Metphies tells Haruo the name of the god that the Exif worship. It's Ghidorah. It isn't said because you can't even say it, because there's this taboo there's like a religious taboo kind of, and because you do not mention say the real name of your god. But
exactly,
that's so creepy. Cinematic though, the way that we're looking at him, we're looking at them when Metphies tells it in his ear. That's just great. I believe that's a fantastic way to set up a genuinely evil kaiju like this, is to do that. We can't even say it, but I'll whisper it in your ear. That's great.
That scene might be my favorite actually of the film, or one of my favorite moments of the film, where you see him walking towards Haruo, and Haruo's like kind of getting a little creeped out, like, Metphies, what are you doing, man? it's effective, and he bends down and says it, but you don't hear it. And then it continues on with the movie, and we get our last battle. And then, of course, they revisit that during the end credits scene in a really interesting way. They literally played the entire scene again, shot the same way, but they just introduced the difference of having the name heard, and that's the end of the film. It was good, and it really set up how terrifying Ghidorah is in this new film.
Yeah, and the first Ghidorah film, they do it so well, and I remember mentioning in the episode about this how awesome it was, where it's Akiko Wakabayashi, and she says, King Ghidorah.
Yeah.
And everybody's looking at her like, wait. And they have this expression on their face like, wait a minute, what is she talking about now? This is not good. This does not sound good at all. There are a lot of horror movies that do stuff like that.
It is. It's almost like don't say the name, don't chant the name 3 times.
Yeah, don't say Beetlejuice 3 times.
Don't say Beetlejuice 3 times. But if you maybe you should say Beetlejuice 3 times, because then Ghidorah won't show up. Because it's worse. I refused to set a single expectation for this movie, and I think it really made my viewing experience better than a lot of other people's, because even Toho saying, yeah, this film's going to have a great Mechagodzilla versus Godzilla battle.
Oops.
I didn't really listen to that because, I was just like, okay. And I don't even think I heard that until later on, because I didn't really need to know anything about the film other than the trailer that I saw and the cool poster with Mechagodzilla's head kind of laying in the middle of the ruined city. That was all I really needed to know. And I went in, and the second film didn't disappoint me at all. And it seems to be the film out of the 3 that has garnered the most ire from fans.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems to be the one that's been the punching bag the most out of all 3 of them. I've heard a lot of more generally positive stuff about the third one. A lot of people said the first one was this, that, or the other thing, boring, whatever. But the second one really seems to have irked a lot of people.
Yeah.
I really think it all comes down to Mechagodzilla. And as I mentioned before, I am actually a really, really big fan of the way they handled Mechagodzilla in this film. I love the risk that they took, and it's unique.
I don't mind being surprised.
Yeah. Yeah, I like different takes on things. I mean, we've seen, Mechagodzilla as the kind of standard Mechagodzilla for 5 films now, with 3 different interpretations of the character. And of course, that's not including comics and manga and, all these different things. And it's all kind of fit within a very similar framework. And to have the character experimented with, it's, I'm not saying everybody needs to go and love this thing. It's not going to please everybody, but it doesn't have to. To me, the idea of a Mechagodzilla city paid off because for a number of reasons. And that entire last sequence of the film with the city fighting Godzilla, my only real kind of gripe with that scene was that we kind of lost the sense of scale for Godzilla. He didn't look that big, but he's big, so it didn't really bother me. Mm-hmm. But other than that sequence was just really phenomenal and really exciting, and it really looks like they're going to win. It kind of reminded me of a Godzilla concept for a film that never got made. Yeah. Where Godzilla fought a kind of Skynet-controlled kind of big city's worth of mechs.
Yes.
And he basically marches through this fortress to fighting off all these robots to reach the mainframe. And it was it was a story submission from the late 80s or the mid to late 80s that didn't get selected for the next film because there was a big competition that was held in the late 80s to decide what the next Godzilla story was going to be, and Biollante won. This particular Godzilla concept didn't, but they ended up taking it, removing Godzilla, rewriting it, and then they made the movie Gunhead out of it. It ultimately kind of became Gunhead, or at least influenced Gunhead in some way. So I kind of, ever since I learned about that years ago, the idea of Godzilla fighting a city that fights back has always really fascinated me. So finally seeing it happen was a cool payoff for someone like me who's fascinated with Godzilla lore and all of the interesting places that the franchise could have gone but didn't. So I liked that. The design for the city was really, really cool. Its properties were really interesting. And quite frankly, the design for the Mechagodzilla himself before he melts down and turns into the city, and you see him in the flashbacks, and there's a wonderful action figure that got made of that character, even though you never see him. I really kind of dig that look too. It's really, really cool. To me, to have a look that interesting and that kind of angular and spiky and very anime and then not use it is really a hugely ballsy move. But to me, to have that look and then say the story would be better served by taking it in this slightly more ambitious, risky direction and then to actually commit and do it, I have a lot of respect for that.
Yeah, just don't advertise that there's going to be a big battle with...
Don't do that.
Yeah, not so much. Yeah. But yeah, I agree with everything you said. I mean, it's a grand idea, and it reminds me now, thinking of it, it kind of reminds me of Superman 3.
Actually, yeah, now that I think about it.
Which is from 1983, where, the guy's sister gets integrated into the machine and everything, it's kind of...
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, obviously, Superman 3 is a bit different tone than this is.
Slightly.
There's no Richard Pryor character in this.
No, there's not.
nor is there a John C. Reilly character like in Kong Skull Island either.
Yeah, there's no real levity
Sekizawa character either.
No,
there's funny Sekizawa anything.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be like a Marvel movie where you're cracking jokes every 2 seconds, even though the world is ending, which works for those films really well. I enjoy those films a lot, but it didn't have to have a Sekizawa type, haha, I'm over here eating my egg kind of a character. It didn't need somebody complaining about their corns. Even though that was an English
nobody
word.
in the newspaper office cracking jokes and.
No Frankie Sakai beating up goons. Nothing like that. Or angry bank robbers spitting in the sand. But it didn't need that.
No, and I love the mood and the tone as it is, like I said, and is not everybody's kind of vibe that they want in a Godzilla movie, but I do appreciate that they did do it. Another thing I appreciate that they did was that nice visual where Godzilla uses his atomic breath / ray, essentially, super powerful ray. He attacks the Mechagodzilla city for the first time. The beam comes out, and then what does it do? It refracts into like a bunch of different beams off of it. But that impact and the refraction of those beams, that looks really good.
It was really impressive. The Godzilla's ray is really cool in the trilogy.
Yeah, it is.
The different ways that it's used and the fact that it can almost be used to snipe in a weird way. Like in the very first film, when the landing craft is attempting to flee to space to get to the Eratrum and Godzilla shows up at the base and Haruo sees it all happen. It's the explosion that kills his parents. Godzilla... You kind of see some sparks, and then he goes dark for a second, and then you see a blink and you miss it blue beam come out of his mouth, hit the ship, and it explodes. And it really looks like more of a concussive force than an explosive one, because it damages the ship and kind of pushes it off course, but it doesn't really explode it on the spot. It just kind of knocks it out of the sky. And that's an interesting idea. Just having it almost looked like they designed it so that it wouldn't explode when he hit it, but it still was so powerful that it like knocked it off its course and destroyed it inevitably in the end, of course.
Yeah, like it knocks you down even if it misses you.
Yeah, and the fact that it just goes in all these directions and it does these crazy things, but the moment like that you mentioned in part 2 with the refracting beam, it's just one of those great visuals that just looks good, and it works in anime where it might not work for live action. And seeing all the things Godzilla's beam did put me in mind of Shin Godzilla's crazy spike beams, and that come out of his back. But it worked for that film because it wasn't too crazy, and of course, it was Hideaki Anno, and he's most famous for his anime. But so that moment it worked really well. But there are a couple of moments in the anime films where I looked at the way the ray was used and the way Godzilla was used and just a lot of things in general. And as we were discussing before, you can't do that in live action and have it look as appropriate or compelling, I think. And there's ways to do it, but the way they did it in this film just really took advantage of the anime format and made a really kind of an exciting climax for this, where it really looks like things are going to go the right way, but they're not, and of course they don't.
Yes, which gets us to the ending of the second part, which I can almost see people going and like rating it bad, like as soon as that ends. Like
like
with her and everything, and it's like the humanity at the end is like, oh my God, crushing me right now at this ending.
Yeah.
Oh, it was tough. Yeah. That's like possibly one of the toughest endings to anything Godzilla that I've ever seen.
It was brutal.
It's tough. It's definitely operatic. That's for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And it was one of those moments where I was really appreciative of the score and the way it was used.
Yeah, the score really did it too.
Yeah, because the one thing we haven't talked about yet was Takayuki Hattori's score for he'd scored all three of these films, and there are a lot of people that don't really dig his style, but I love his score for Space Godzilla and his score for Godzilla 2000. Those are two of my favorite Godzilla scores. I really like his style. And when I heard he was doing these films, I saw a lot of people roll their eyes and go, "Oh, it's that guy." But my first thought was, "Oh, he's back." I like his style, and he's a great composer for anime specifically. So I was really interested to see where he was going to go with this score, and for all three of these films, because I almost think of it as one really big score, almost like I think of the films as one really big film. Yeah. So it's like one really big work. It works a lot of the time really, really well, and the ending of part two, movie number 2. Is one of his best moments, I think, of the trilogy, and just how his music is used. Wow, you said operatic, and I think that works really, really well. It's just the visuals and what's happening, and it is
an
a
abrupt
series
ending
of
too. Really,
it is very abrupt.
Just boom, like lays it on you right at the end. I was like, wow, gosh, Hattori really did an amazing job with these anime movies. You had to make a tragic sounding score for this, and it's not necessarily easy.
I really hope that, I know there are, like I said before, there are fans that aren't big fans of his particular music. I'd like to think that he's perhaps been redeemed in their eyes a little bit by these films, but just the way these films have been received by a lot of fans thus far, I doubt it, which is really too bad, because his work in these films is wonderful. And he's a really wonderful composer, and I love his previous two scores. And when I found out he was doing these three movies, I was ecstatic, because I thought, man, what is he going to bring to this? And it's a big one for me, because my first Godzilla movie that I saw any part of was Godzilla 2000 when I was really, really young, and I still love that film. And it's one of my favorite scores that he ever did of all these movies, and it's one of my favorite Godzilla scores from that film. And so when he came back, it was really cool to see, just on a personal level. And I was really excited to hear a new Hattori Godzilla score, because we're in an interesting moment now where we're never going to get to hear another Akira Ifukube score again. We're never going to get to hear another new Masaru Sato score. We're just at that point in the series history where these wonderful gentlemen just aren't with us anymore. And so to have a veteran of the series come back is really cool to me, and it was amazing. His scores for these films are great, and I actually don't own them on their own yet, but it's something I'd like to acquire one of these days coming up soon, to see if listening to them on their own, listening to the score on its own, works as well as it does with the visuals in the film.
Getting on to part 3 of the anime series, this is the one I actually like the most out of the 3. It's easily my favorite one. It's not just because of Ghidorah, even though a lot of it is. This is where everything gets tied up, and the philosophy is completely done so well that it really makes an impact. We're going to talk later about the more specific philosophical stuff, but there's a lot to appreciate in part 3.
Oh, I totally agree with that. Part 3 it might honestly be my favorite. I think it's probably the best put together of all of them, because not only is it just thematically and cinematically rich in all kinds of interesting things and philosophically rich, but it's put together nice. It's exciting, and it flows really, really well. And
the pacing is good.
It ties everything together. The pacing is really, really good. It does feel like a climax in the ultimate sense. It's about the most climactic climax you could imagine for this franchise, this 3-film series that they've done. But I don't think I closed my eyes for the whole hour and a half ish that it ran. I was completely enthralled, and I just was wondering what they were going to do. And I ran the gamut of emotions. It was sad in parts, it was terrifying in parts, it was exciting in parts, and I think I think of the trilogy, it's probably the best, and it's the payoff for watching the other two, which is as good as I think they are. You know, if anybody out there didn't really feel the first two, and you're just like, I don't think I should watch the third one, give it a shot. Watch the third one. You know, you might be surprised and I think you'll be surprised at how much more enjoyable it makes rewatching the first two, honestly.
Yeah, and that's what we've sort of done in this episode, is say the third one enhances the first two when you rewatch them. And these are pretty rewatchable. I probably watched Planet Eater 4 times, 5 times in the past week and a half, just to make sure that I was completely on the same page with what was going on. And then I did the English dubbing to further get the better explanation of it in English, because I think the script for the dub is really good. The beginning, of course, is haunting right off the bat, and it maintains this mood the entire time, really. It's this creepy voiceover from Metphies, who says how they've been messing around with Earth the entire time, and we'll get more to that. We'll get more about that in the philosophy section later, but very chilling. It's thrown right out there that, yes, Haruo is the ultimate tool of alien, I don't say invaders, but invaders really isn't the point. Or invading really isn't the point. Yeah, it's just worse than that, actually. So in the first half hour of this, it's the run-up to where the action really starts. In this, we get the events in the second part tied up. There's this essentially mutiny, and for once, the humans say no to the aliens. Yeah,
they're finally kind of standing up for themselves a little bit.
Yeah, and they're like, wait a minute.
Finally.
This doesn't... It does not seem that Haruo is that crazy, that he would defend Godzilla. Then they're like, wait a minute, what exactly was going on with the city anyway? And then they realize, okay, this is what we're afraid it was. And then they say that Haruo is what? A religious icon now in the eyes of the Exif and all the humans that are following Metphies down this road.
Yeah, they see him as essentially a chosen one figure at this point. He's not, just like this vengeance-driven person. He's got the hand of the Exif's god is guiding him somehow, and he's to be the one to see people through to salvation. And he doesn't really want any part of it, but as because now the Bila Solido are completely out of the way. And so this is where Metphies really starts kicking into gear and creates his Ghidorah cult of humans. And this is the part where it really reminds me of the thing we talked about earlier with the Heaven's Gate cult, with all these people believing in this extraterrestrial force that's going to take them away. In the end, it does end up being a little too similar to the Heaven's Gate cult and similar cults, where it ends up being a suicide thing in the end. But it is interesting to see it all kind of come apart at the seams, because, at this point, humanity's numbers are very low on Earth. There's, the Bila Solido are gone. It looks like their last hope is gone. So, if you thought Metphies was smug looking in the last two movies, now he knows he's got them in the palm of his hand. And he's ready to rock. And
everybody else is joining the cult too. A lot more humans are glomming onto the philosophy because of just how messed up everything has gotten. The part where Metphies tells Haruo, your hate for Godzilla has to overcome your resistance to believing in God. And it makes him quite upset. And he's starting to realize what Metphies is really doing. But he only realizes far too late what really is going on.
Yeah, it does not go well from that point on, but he doesn't realize immediately what's going on here. And this is where the groundwork from the previous two films, and if you've been paying attention to Metphies, this is where things start really kind of coming together. The thing about these moments is that you can feel the tension start to rise, because we know something's up, and we're still not entirely sure what. We know, we all know it's going to end in Ghidorah coming, but we don't know what the cost is going to be yet as audience members, and we're not going to know how that's going to affect the characters and what characters, and this entire first chunk of the movie where you're seeing the surviving humans kind of giving into this very easy way out. This very like, okay, so if you believe in this thing, then it's going to save you. And when you're in a desperate situation like that, you'll believe anything a very good spoken person will tell you, if you're in a very, very desperate situation like that. And there's definitely a lot of political overtones to that, as well as religious.
Yeah.
History is full of sweet talking people who promise power, and then ultimately it's very, very, very bad for the people in the end. And I'm sure I don't need to start listing out individual countries that have done that, but that is certainly not a new thing.
No,
and it's not new for religions either. But I detected overtones of both of those things while I was watching the film, because Metphies speaks at once like a religious leader, but also almost like a political leader at the same time, but in his very calm, cool, creepy, understated kind of a way. We know he's up to something. The humans that fell for Metphies' lies pay, horribly, almost before they know how badly they've messed up.
And then DiManna actually finds Metphies. He says, "You've been here this whole time," and he starts talking to her telepathically, and we're like, uh-oh. And then the big revelation drops on us that he's been telepathic this whole time. He's been reading everybody's minds. He's been reading the Bilisaludo's minds, even. Everybody. She says, "It's because you weren't talking. Because, when other people were, you were just sitting there." And that's what he was doing. And that's what he was doing in the other two movies. In the other two parts, because that's just not something that we knew, though. And it takes one of the Hotuans, specifically one of the twins, to discover him and unmask him as a manipulator. And she says, "Why did you do this?" And he's like, "Well, trust." Yeah.
Exactly.
One-way trust, but yeah. And then we get the scary dream. Or not dream, but we say induced nightmare.
Yeah, a vision, perhaps.
And we see her in the soup.
Oh, God. Yeah, that creeped me out, because initially I didn't know if it was
Yeah, I thought he killed her.
If it was a dream or not. I thought he killed her. And then, and then he wakes up, it's a dream, and then it cuts right to that next scene where what he saw in his dream is essentially happening, and they've got the big old cauldron, and they're taking sips. And, of course, my first thought was, oh, my God, he cooked and is drinking a Mothra twin.
Yeah, I was like, are they drinking her blood? Is that where we are now?
Would they have done that? And of course my answer was, yeah, they would have done that.
It's the anime movies. They've done just about everything in that department, so I wouldn't put it past them.
Yeah, like why would I be surprised if that's what they did? And of course I thought, no, I would not be surprised. This is exactly what they would do. The way it was put together totally got me and creeped me out a little bit. And then it just got creepier from there, that entire sequence.
Yeah, and then the fantastic sequence with with this cult and the cauldron, and then finally the Ghidorah appears in that shadow. It starts ripping all these people apart, cutting parts off of them.
Oh God, yeah.
The sound that it makes when that happens was eerie as can be.
Yeah, it was eerie.
That's the most like a horror film that these anime movies go, I think.
It got very gross very quickly, and you didn't really see a lot of it. It was more implied violence, but sometimes that's scarier.
Yes, it is.
It's a lot scarier, and it gave me some Raiders of the Lost Ark vibes, actually, that entire sequence with the entire room's worth of very, very devoted people, having this religious experience that ultimately kills them off. But of course it doesn't, Metphies' face doesn't melt or anything, but it's, he's the one controlling the whole thing. But it made me think of that. But the way they shot that sequence was so unique and truly terrifying that I was watching it like with my hand over my mouth for a couple seconds. The first time I saw the film, I was just thinking, my God, this is like really terrifying. Ghidorah is actively creeping me the heck out right now. And then it goes up to space, and you see that aspect of it summoning. And at that point, space-time just opens, and Ghidorah's head snakes out of the singularity.
Yeah, the singularity.
And yeah, and it starts going around the Eratrum, and that scene, like some clips of that are in the trailer that one of the trailers they released for the film. And on seeing this scene, I thought, wait a minute, are they gonna destroy the ship? And my first thought was, if they do, then what's going to happen to humanity? Like, if they do that, then I don't know where they're going to take the rest of this movie, because they're way off the planet.
Yeah.
If there's any movie ever made that's going to have the guts to do it, it's this movie.
Absolutely.
They're gonna do it. Every Bilusalido, probably everywhere, is dead. All of the surviving men, women, and human children in the universe, potentially, are dead.
Mm-hmm.
And the creepiest thing is, they're on the deck watching it all happen with a smile on his face as the ex-High Priest.
Yes. And he's literally laughing as the whole destruction occurs, and it's like gravity is doing the damage.
Yes, it's literally just gravity and, this incredible real force that exists, just doing its thing. It just like punched me in the gut, and I was like, I don't know where they're going to go from here, but I cannot wait to find out. But I was genuinely creeped out at that point. I was like, there might be nothing this film isn't brave enough to do at this point.
Yeah. Another fantastic sci-fi horror thing that I have to say was incredible was the fact that they read that there's no life signs before they're actually dead. Like, they're dead before they're dead. Like, that is creepy and scary and extremely effective. And they, because they have the woman there she's like reading off all this stuff off the screen, and she's like, we're technically dead. There's no life signs here right where we're standing. Like, that's incredible. Wonderful.
Yeah. But that was a fascinating aspect of the whole thing. Just that thought of this thing is so powerful. It's so beyond our capability to understand what it's doing, why it's doing it, that it shows up and you technically don't exist before you don't exist. Like, it's horrifying. It's horrifying.
And the way Ghidorah is handled in this is really good. It's a space monster. That's how Ghidorah has been originally. And it's also the fact that it's on a completely different level of existence. It adds another level of mystery and another level of sort of invincibility, because it can touch you and kill you, but your hands go through it if you touch it.
Yeah, it touches but cannot be touched. That entire scene when it comes down and it starts to encircle Godzilla was just really an incredible moment, because it bites him and it constricts him and it lifts him. This 300-meter mountain lifts him into the air, and Godzilla swings at it, and his hand just goes through it, and I'm just sitting there watching it thinking, Ghidorah, you cheating bastard. That's not okay. Like, why would you do? But it was just unbelievably cool, and an interesting angle on Ghidorah too, which is strange, because if you look at it, of the monsters in the films, not the whole universe as a whole with the prequels or anything, but just the films, Ghidorah might be the most traditionally presented of the monsters, other than Godzilla himself, and that's saying something. Mm-hmm. But even then, because Mechagodzilla is totally out there, Godzilla's mostly plant in this. Mothra is literally just an egg. But Ghidorah's got his 3 heads, and in silhouette you do see the wings and the body. It's all there. The traditional body is there, but you don't ever see that. And he's even got his cackle that you hear in his visions. So it's very easy to look at it and tell, this is Ghidorah, and he's from space, and you've got these Exilian type characters that are controlling him. But other than that, it's very, it's a very different character, but still recognizable as Ghidorah. And that's a fine line to walk, because you've essentially taken this very well-known character and you've basically filtered it through Lovecraft.
Yeah.
And that's what I really got vibes from here, because I'm a huge H.P. Lovecraft fan. Man, it's just, this thing was an elder god. This thing was an interdimensional being that comes from the stars and, comes into our dimension, and it does not obey our laws of physics. It does not obey anything in our universe. If there's any creature in Toho's vast pantheon of variations on different monster characters that is a god, literally a god, it is Ghidorah. whether or not he's got any, like, he is actually a divine thing, or if he's simply worshipped for being extraordinary by a religious race of aliens is never really talked about, but it doesn't need to be, because this thing's a god. You know what I mean? You look at it, it is a god. And even if it's not actually, you know, a spiritual kind of a thing, it's got godlike powers. It is essentially a titan from Greek mythology. It's untouchable. Literally untouchable. There was a moment while I was watching this where I genuinely thought that this movie might have Ghidorah kill Godzilla, and then Ghidorah just reigns over the universe and wipes everything out, and that was going to be the end. Like, that seemed like a possibility to me.
Yeah, and given how the story's gone up to now with the, you know, bad news and tragedy, that really would fit. It would have fit. I had a feeling we were going to see Godzilla get, like, sucked into another dimension or just completely obliterated, and the planet just become Ghidorah's domain. That could have genuinely been the end of it. And of course it wasn't, but that's how, like, no expectation you could possibly have for this film, you know, could live up to what ultimately happened in it. It's just, it defied any kind of expectation right until its very, very end. But that entire final battle with Ghidorah, and I wouldn't even technically call it a battle, more of an encounter, a confrontation with something that can't be fought, which is terrifying. Yeah.
It was really well handled, which is sad because I've seen a lot of fans essentially call that ending out as like, oh, it was such a lame battle. They like he hit him like once and he couldn't even touch him. And again, everybody's welcome to their opinion, but that's not the point of what was happening. And if you went into, if anybody went into movie 3 thinking that you'd get a monster fight.
Yeah, that's on you.
That's on you. You obviously didn't learn from movie number 2. And if you're still disappointed in that, then, I mean, I can't do anything for you, man. Again, you don't have to love this film. You don't have to love any of these films, but just because the battle wasn't traditional doesn't mean it's not worthy of discussion or praise. And I thought it was very worthy of praise. I mean, it was about as close to a traditional battle as we got in the entire trilogy.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, it was effective for what it was. And to me, it wasn't about the two having a traditional, you know, no holds barred tussle. It was about these two gods meeting, how the small little insignificant insects around them, the Exif and the humans, ultimately interacted with these two gods and either brought about their demise, their arrival, their victories, and whatever, and how those things ultimately interplayed with each other and all tied into this very strange but really interesting philosophy on humanity and technology and religion and all that interesting stuff.
And the music in part 3, the highlight of it is the Ghidorah theme for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really beautiful. And like, if you put any of the other movies, any one of the Ghidorah movies from the Godzilla series, try going into one of those scenes where it's Ghidorah destroying a whole bunch of stuff and play that theme. That music works every time.
That's interesting.
It just fits. But I think in this one, it works maybe the best. But it's really beautiful. And we have that sort of electronic background, eerie sound going on. Then we get the clarinet, and then we have some lower strings. Then the oboe comes in, and it's sort of like warming up into the main part of the theme. But it's really good.
It is really good.
And it has like that low oboe, the big part where it's like dun 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 dun. It's like, wow,
yeah,
this is good.
Yeah, it was grand. It was just grand and horrific, and like it inspired awe and terror. It takes a special kind of a composer to look at material like that and give you something that makes you in awe of it, but also makes you not want to look at it because you think you're gonna die. And like, that is a wonderfully crazy balance to maintain when you're doing a theme, especially for a character that has had really fantastic themes in the past. I mean, Ifukube's Ghidorah theme is one of his best. It's been, you know, it was used right the way up into the 90s.
Yeah.
And even Ko Otani's da 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 theme for Ghidorah for GMK. It does that same thing, but since you're not supposed to be scared of Ghidorah, it works in a little bit of a different way. It brings the grandeur and the awe and kind of the mystical quality of the character really to the forefront, but it's not supposed to make you scared of him. This theme from Torii does something similar, but it injects the fear in a really just, it's so good. Like this is why I need to get these soundtracks, because I would love to listen to that piece in particular. There are a couple pieces scattered throughout the trilogy that I really want to listen to on their own. Because I collect movie soundtracks in general. That's just a passion of mine. And I have the Godzilla soundtracks are my favorites. I love those things to death. And I listen to all of them on their own relatively frequently. And I find that a lot of them stand very well without the film visuals. But I don't have the anime trilogy music yet. And I'd love to see if that still holds true for these particular films. And I feel like something with Ghidorah's theme really would work well for solo listening, just kind of on its own.
Yeah, I've been listening to that track a lot, and I know that the soundtrack for the third one's on Spotify. That's where I found it. But I definitely want to get a hold of these soundtracks for this. It's good. I listen to a lot of soundtracks in general of a lot of different movies and kinds of movies, and I do like the Godzilla soundtracks. I got quite a few tracks from various films that I listen to sometimes, but this is just it's good, and it's not like this heavy, just doom, really loud stuff. It's creepier than that, and you want to get scarier rather than just stuff that's exploding in your ears with brass section or whatever. Yeah. You don't need that.
Exactly.
It's better not to sound hackneyed and overblown. You just want something that is gonna scare you and give you goosebumps and get you prepared. And they use this track 3 times, 4 times, and then at the beginning they use it too with one of the quite overblown title displays for the second and third movies.
Yeah, the titles are interesting beasts for these films.
Yeah, it's like the liquid metal for the second one, and then for the third one it's Ghidorah, like the flowing through there and making the letters out of it. But like both of those, it's like a 30-second ordeal. It's pretty cool though. I like how they added some sort of flourish to the titles. Obviously, a big thing going on with the third movie is this part where Metphies and Haruo are together, and Metphies is like holding him.
Yeah. And
then Haruo is thrown into this series of
almost like psychic visions in a weird way.
Yes,
like
psychic connection with Metphies.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
But it's different music it sounds a lot different than the rest of the music, and it sounds like Bach because it's sort of like it's like, and I think what they were trying to go with that was that all of what Metphies talks about in this is about progress and civilization and cycle of civilizations, which we'll get into that in a little bit. They have this sort of Bachian music playing, and then they show us Einstein's formulas. They show us all kinds of interesting things in this. But the part where basically it's Haruo falling essentially through space, and there's all of this stuff on the screen. And it's like he's falling through the Matrix.
It does look like he fell into a Wachowski brothers or sisters now film, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It looks like he was just kind of like floating around there.
Mm-hmm.
That entire sequence was just really, really bizarre and fascinating to watch.
I could not take my eyes off the screen. It was incredible.
It really was. It was well edited. The music, like you said, was really, really interesting. And it all kind of builds towards a really interesting moment and it ties back to something in the beginning of the third film that I kind of picked up on, where in the very beginning, the scientist guy mentions, we made Godzilla with nuclear testing. And I thought, man, is that the first time that they've really talked about that?
Yeah.
It is. They finally brought the nuclear theme back in. And then, of course, we jump into Metphies' little crazy, trippy hallucination he's giving to Haruo. And you do see atomic bombs. I got chills watching it. It was combined with the music. It was like, horrific. It was creepy. And to see all that happen and to see like what it all meant and how, how he was talking about technology and all of this crazy stuff and, how it was all put together, and it all ends in Mothra of all things.
Yeah.
One of the things I was really interested in was what they were going to do with Mothra. I think a lot of people were kind of convinced that they were just going to kind of forget Mothra existed. I said, even if they do, then there's going to be a reason, and I just want to go watch this movie. So I didn't go in expecting Mothra to show up. And the way they implemented Mothra into this dream trippy sequence was really interesting too. The fact that they went to the egg and Mothra, it doesn't actually physically show up, but you do get to see her in silhouette. You get to see her design. She's really beautiful as usual. And she acts as the kind of the divine force, kind of the fourth god in the room, as it were, because you've got Godzilla and Mothra, Mechagodzilla and Ghidorah. She's the fourth god and goddess, I suppose, in the room. And she appears in the vision and severs the connection between Metphies and Haruo. She manifests herself in their vision, which was really, really cool. And I haven't seen a lot about that appearance from other fans, but I'm sure a lot of people were probably like, oh, she's not even in the movie. She was just a vision. I'm just glad we got to see her.
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm glad we got to see her in some form. And we got to see the egg too, which was pretty cool. It all kind of just lends itself to the bizarre nature of how the characters are dealt with, in the monster characters specifically, are dealt with in this trilogy. And the fact that even though it's about as non-traditional as you could possibly get, it works in a very weird way. At least it worked for me. I liked that Mothra had that ability to intercede in this kind of divine way to stop Metphies from controlling Haruo any further, and God knows what he would have showed him next.
Yeah.
Maybe it would have been the clincher that finally convinced Haruo to give Ghidorah all of the power it needed. Maybe this was the thing that would have turned him into a willing conduit.
Yeah, because that's what Haruo was expected to do. He was expected to embrace Ghidorah and embrace the planet being destroyed and ending his suffering.
Exactly.
In the way that the Exif talk about ending suffering, suicide, etc. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Then something happens that Metphies does not predict, which is what? Haruo, for once, exercises his free will, and he stops Metphies.
Yeah, and that pretty much brings the whole thing crumbling down at that point.
And if it weren't for that, Ghidorah would have killed Godzilla.
Absolutely would have happened.
There's no doubt about
Godzilla
that.
was...
Yeah.
So this is the second time that Haruo has indirectly saved Godzilla's life.
Yeah.
And you can only imagine how he must have felt knowing that he had done that. And maybe that kind of plays a part into the ultimate fate of his character at the end of the movie. But in this instance, he certainly... He made an interesting call there. I mean, he's made a couple of interesting choices in here. Like in the first movie, he makes the choice to go ahead with this plan, and then of course it doesn't go very well. And that was just the small Godzilla. And then in the second film, he chooses his own humanity and Yuko over the Bilosaludo's way and saves Godzilla in the process. And then in this film, he rejects the Exif way, just like he rejected the Bilosaludo's way, and saves Godzilla in the process. Like, he had two opportunities, very clearly good opportunities to see Godzilla destroyed, but it was ultimately, a question of at what additional cost.
Yeah.
And he decided to take the noble route. Whether or not that played a part in what ultimately happens to him is kind of anyone's guess. But if it didn't, I'd be surprised, honestly. I feel like it probably made his ultimate decision clearer for him, I would say.
Do you think the Exif helped get Haruo to destroy the Mechagodzilla city?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's more manipulation there. But at the same time, I don't think that was as much free will on the part of Haruo. I don't as much.
Yeah, I think Haruo's decision was very much influenced by specifically Metphies, because he does beam in and say, oh, by the way, that stuff's going to spread across the planet if you don't kill it. Wait, don't listen to him. And then he blows him up. Yeah,
because the Exif, that it's not in their interest to have the Bilosaludo get away with anything.
Yeah, so what we were seeing in that instance is really Metphies presenting Haruo with the illusion of free will. Yeah. He made him think he made the choice. but he didn't make the choice entirely for himself. I mean, he made the choice in the end. He could have ignored Metphies, but I think Metphies knew Haruo wasn't going to ignore him.
Right.
So it was just another bit of manipulation from what might be the Godzilla series master manipulator at this point. I don't think there's a more manipulative character in any of these movies.
In the entire Godzilla franchise, there's nobody more manipulative. The entire franchise,
there's just not a whole lot going on. There's aliens that have used humans as leverage for invasions. There's
this really blows away the Zillions from Astro Monster.
It blows the Zillions away. It blows the original Planet X. Not Planet X. The simian aliens in their manipulation of Mifune out of the water. Even the Futurians kind of manipulating Emi in Ghidorah, Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, and a couple of other scenarios here and there. But really, we're looking at 3 movies worth of groundwork leading up to the reveal of this ultimate plan for Metphies to bring the universe under the control of his elder god. I mean, it doesn't get much more manipulative than that. But he can't do it without Haruo, and in the end, Haruo does exercise that very elusive free will. Yeah. Ghidorah becomes defeatable. Mm-hmm. That's also the death blow for Metphies, too, because he dies soon after that. And obviously, Haruo owed Metphies a lot. I mean, Metphies was, in a lot of ways, his closest friend. You know what I mean? Yeah. He was a confidant. And even though it was all a lie and all a manipulation, there was still a connection there and a person that Haruo thought he could trust. And so, that he weeps over Metphies' body is not surprising. And it is a sad moment. I mean, I don't think anybody was out there was saying, "Oh no, Metphies is dead." No. Everybody was probably quite relieved that this butt was dead. But he's like, well, he's not here to mess up our universe anymore. But it's still a sad moment, and it's a sad moment for Haruo in a lot of ways, because that one moment he exercised his free will cost this guy his life, and it may have saved everything else, and
it saves Godzilla.
It saves Godzilla, and it literally, humanity is not just no better off, they are worse off than, at least in Haruo's eyes. And it's implied that this is the only way for mankind to continue to live, but in Haruo's eyes, they're now stuck. I mean, his confidant is gone. There's no Mechagodzilla. There's no personnel to attack Godzilla now. There's no technology, even if they had the personnel to do it. Then, of course, that brings us to the end and how alone he is in what's left. After the dust has settled over 3 films worth of events, he still stands alone against Godzilla, but he's even more alone than he was before. And that ultimately leads into the end.
And Metphies curses him as he's dying.
Yes.
And he says, Ghidorah will always be with you. Yeah. Which is, that's the one that, it's sort of like in religious ceremonies, in Christianity, where they're like, and also with you. It's like,
and also, and with you, and with you, and with you.
But
I am definitely.
But, that's the worst thing that you want to be with you, is to have Ghidorah always with you.
Yeah, you do not want a interdimensional 3-headed elder god kaiju always with you. That would be a bad
very creepy.
Yeah, that would not be a good thing.
Yeah. The ending is a happy ending, but it is a pretty messed up happy ending. And I think a lot of people this is one reason why they might not like this movie, the part 3, because it does it's kind of sad, folks, and
it's sad.
But at the same time, what is he doing?
It needed to happen.
You have to realize he has to kill himself, because once Dr. Martin shows him the technology that he's revived in one of these vultures.
The technology definitely has to go. The channel for Ghidorah definitely has to go. He's always going to represent, the warrior that refuses to give up even after the war is over. And in a lot of ways, if you look at it that way, he reminded me of Jinguji from Atragon.
Yes, which I just did the episode on that the most recent one. And then I did the whole special topic on holdouts, Japanese holdouts from the war. Yep. But
that's exact. That's what he reminded. He reminded me of that exact discussion.
Onoda.
And the fact that he really feels like that. There's a lot of an interesting Japanese nationalism present in Haruo's character. And this third film, the ending of this third film, really drilled that home for me. The idea that Haruo is a war veteran that cannot accept defeat, and even though the new way will be peaceful, the only way to ensure that that warlike nature doesn't taint humanity in the future is to remove it, and therefore he must remove himself.
Yes, and he must get rid of his hatred. That's the big point, is that he must let go of his hatred, and this is the only way to do it. And he's the last one on Earth with that hatred present.
Yes.
And he knows that he must get rid of it this way. And then he decides to take her along with him so that everything can go. Because she's basically in suspended animation, comatose.
She's not coming. She's not coming out.
Yeah.
She is not coming out of it. She's basically dead for the entire movie.
Right.
But it's worse because she's not dead, but she is dead.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, Haruo might not have been able to go through with it if he'd left her behind.
Yeah.
Because in a lot of ways, he probably felt very complicit in her current state of being and being in that comatose state, and so
The amount of guilt that he's feeling by this point is so extreme that there's no other way to deal with it than commit suicide. I mean, how many people does he get killed?
Almost the entire human race. All but 8 people.
Everybody. So, it's that too. It's guilt. It's hatred. It's destroying the technology. It's getting rid of. The part where he realizes and sees Ghidorah. That is chilling. Mm-hmm. That's scary.
It is scary because it's this inevitability of the cyclical nature of technology coming and going, as humanity continues to progress. And if it's weird, and it is genuinely terrifying to think that, we are at this point in the film as humanity where we're basically cave people, very primitive clothing, very little technology, no technology. And
it's
fact.
Like humans don't necessarily want to live like this. Like what do they say? They want to get out of this primitive culture.
Exactly.
That's what would be on the minds of quite a few people.
Exactly. But that might be the only way, like embracing that might be the only way for humanity to even
survive,
continue to survive. Exactly. And so and I think the other aspect of that is, of course, that if Haruo knows that if there is any potential beginning to the path that will lead to Ghidorah coming back, it is through him.
Yeah.
It's not just because he's still a conduit, but because, through him that vengeance still lives, that anger still goes on into the future. It could like, and even at this point, we have to remember he's also going to be a father very soon.
Yeah.
What kind of a father would a man filled with that much vengeance be to the child of a civilization that needs to not be filled with hate and vengeance in order to continue to live in a world where Godzilla is not just a king, but a god? And that is a really fascinating way to look at it, because if you take all of those things and you combine them, if you combine the fact that he's a warrior without a war to fight, that he's filled with anger that he can't let ruin the civilization, and then the fact that Ghidorah sees through him and the technology could be coming, like, his death isn't just a convenient way to end the series and get rid of him. It is the only thing that they could have done. His only path forward is into Godzilla. Like, he has to, like, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's terribly tragic. But his death, like the moment Godzilla's beam hits the ship and the ship goes away, and the movie ends a couple seconds later. But in that those few moments after the ship explodes and it's just Godzilla on screen, there's a very brief but very eerie feeling of peace.
Yeah.
And it feels very wrong. Like when you're watching the movie, it just feels very, very wrong to be watching this thing and thinking, my God, like he's dead. His ship just rammed into Godzilla. And he's gone now, and he took Yuko, and it's horribly, horribly sad. But that moment, you feel tension go away. It's very weird, because you'd think the death of your protagonist would, especially in the last 5 seconds of your movie, would make you a little on edge, a little tense. But there's this weird feeling of peace that came over me, at least, when I watched that scene, and those couple of seconds of silence as Godzilla stood there, bam, fade to black, roll credits. And my head was spinning, and I thought, I've just seen something really, really intelligent. It's going to go over a lot of people's heads, and like I've been saying this whole episode, to each their own. Not everybody has to love this thing, or even like it, or even ever watch them again, or give them a chance, or anything. I mean, But there's something going on in this trilogy that's really special, and the ending is kind of remarkable.
The other thing is too with the ending is that he does experience peace himself right before, because you see that expression of calmness come over his face.
It's the first calmness he's experienced that we can actively see his character like going through for all three movies.
Yeah, so he's finally been given a couple of seconds of peace and realization that it's over.
Yeah, he's going to end things, and it's taken all of this sacrifice and all of this to realize that the way to end it isn't for him to kill Godzilla, but for Godzilla to kill him. It brings this trilogy to a very unusually satisfying climax. It's very weird to describe it, but it's sad, certainly, and it's tragic, and you kind of wish things hadn't gone that way, but it's the way it when it's all over and you're looking back at all three of them, you realize that it was kind of the only way it could go, but nobody could have predicted that.
Yeah, no way.
Which I no way. Yeah. I had no idea.
And what do we see right before it fades to black? The flowers. The flowers that bloomed in spring. And that's recalling the charm that his parents gave him that had the spring flower inside it.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's recalling to that.
And the name Haruo does mean spring.
Yeah.
And of course, spring symbolizes rebirth.
So it represents humanity getting a chance and peace getting a chance. And that's why we see the flowers at the end.
It's just what an incredible way to just wrap up your film, man. You've got the death of the character, Godzilla standing there, flower, end credits. It's powerful, and I love films that end with that one kind of enigmatic, symbolic image of things. Flowers are a very a popular choice for a lot of films like that. One of my favorite movies of all time, Pan's Labyrinth, Guillermo del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth, ends with a flower blooming. And there's a kind of a different significance to that than in this one, but I kind of reminded me of that. And even though we don't actually see the flower bloom in this particular film, it has bloomed and it's there, and it is a very hopeful image, and it's very unusual because it's just followed the death of your character, but there is that brief little quiet moment of hope, and then you're shown hope, and then it's over, and you're just kind of sitting there with your head spinning going, what in the world did I just see, and why am I about to cry?
Yeah.
Why is this emotional? This is amazing.
And there's actually a part where Haruo is with Metphies. He's like, why are you showing me this?
Yes.
And I'm thinking oh God, I think a few people in the audience might be thinking this right now at the end of this movie. What
exactly.
What did I just see? Why are you showing me this? But
I saw a lot of reactions to that effect where people were saying, just finished Planet Eater, don't know what the heck I just watched. And
and of course the ending got spoiled for me because everybody on Facebook said that he committed suicide, and I was like, oh, thanks.
Yeah, but, I got spoiled for a couple things in the first two movies. I think I was even spoiled about the big Godzilla ending of the first one, where Godzilla dies and then the actual one shows up. And but that one, if I'm remembering correctly, that one did get spoiled for me, and I was a little miffed. I was not happy about that. So I avoided spoilers for Planet Eater like the plague. I wanted to know nothing. I stayed away from anywhere that might talk about it. I just did my best to not. And I did. I didn't know anything that would happen from frame 1 to frame A to frame Z. I had no idea what was going to happen. I'm shocked that I was able to stay away from spoilers as much as I did, but I am so glad I did, because knowing what was going to happen in this film would have made the experience of seeing it the first time so much less awesome. I did see a lot of very confused people because after I saw the movie, I got online just to kind of see, I don't really have any interest in seeing a lot of other reviews, but I definitely had an interest in seeing what other people's interpretations might have been for that film, and especially for the ending. I saw some interesting ones. I definitely saw some weird kind of things, and most people, I think, were just kind of saying, "Oh, he's dead," and nobody was sad about it because he sucked. No, but a lot of very confused people. That said, you and I are not the only human beings on this earth that saw the ending and got what it meant. So it's certainly this entire anime trilogy certainly isn't for everyone. It's not going to be everyone's milieu, as it were. But for my money, it ended really, really satisfyingly, which is weird to say, but it ended, like I said before, the only way I think it could have. It was an interesting ride. It was an interesting ride, if nothing else.
The next episode of this podcast will be the third of the 3-part episode on the anime trilogy, which is the related topic. I call it Godzilla, Bigger Than Human Existence. We will delve deep into this story because it's one of the deepest Godzilla stories ever written. If you're on the fence, or if you don't like the anime trilogy, at least the subjects that we bring up in this episode are exciting to think about. I'd like to send a shout out to our patrons Kyoe Toshi and Sean Stiff. Kyoe donated at the Kaiju Scholar level, and Sean donated at the Kaiju Visionary level. Thanks for your support, I really appreciate it. Donating is worth it, you get the inside track to what is going on in the show, and you get to message with me personally. If you'd like to send some feedback, I'd love to hear from you. The email address is feedback@kaijuvision.com. You can also follow the podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Kaijuvision Radio is available on Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, Blueberry, TuneIn, Podcast Addict, YouTube with Scenic videos, and on kaijuvision.com. If you like the podcast, please donate on Patreon. I'm Brian Scherschel.
I'm Daniel DiManna.
And this is KVR Kaijuvision Radio. See you next time.